gives me to participate, not just this morning, but in the being a learning lab partner. I want to say you're on cohort. This cohort that's going to start will be which
15.
one? 15. I think I have participated in 13 of the cohorts, so I have missed two. But otherwise, I've had a great relationship with Dog Tag. And if you haven't been by the physical building, the food and the coffee is amazing. So make sure that you stop by there as well. So a little bit about me. So I'm a Navy veteran. I spent most of my career doing information warfare, information operations type of stuff. And after I left, I worked for a couple of government contractors and then started my first business with a business partner, which was a deli in central Pennsylvania, because after 20 years of doing top secret work, that's what you do, is you open a deli in the middle of Pennsylvania. So I got that experience, and I caught the small business bug. I kind of had lost it when I was a kid. I was the kid that had like the paper route. I had customers that I raked leaves or mowed lawns or whatever. Back when kids did such things, I recycled steel and aluminum cans and you name it, anything to earn a little extra money I was doing. And I obviously didn't do a whole lot of that in the military, but that has certainly returned as a small business owner. So I've opened 3 or 4 businesses of my own. I have assisted hundreds of other business owners. I was a small business administration, so SBA resource partner. So I ran a business incubator. I was the director of a small business development center. I started the Veterans Business Outreach Center for the Mid-Atlantic, and now I am executive director of a Main Street program up on Capitol Hill in DC. And I always tell folks the title of executive director is quite exalted, especially when you're an organization of one person. So I get to complain both about my employees and my boss at the same time. So that's been my background. So quite a bit of experience, different experiences, managing nonprofits and again, helping businesses themselves. And so I've done a lot of training and a lot of counseling, and the lab that I typically teach with Dog Tag is called Don't Make Me Think. It's on critical thinking skills for the business owner, and that came about from another class I was teaching. I was talking, basically it was small business startup 101, and we talked about the business plan and the financial plan and the marketing plan and all this stuff. And at the end of it, person came up and said, holding his head, and was just like, is there any business I can start that won't make me think? And the answer is no, but I understood what he was saying, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But so much of, I worked on my MBA a little bit later in life. I was in my 40s when I went back to get my MBA, and just looking at other programs within like the SBA, there's a lot of what you need to do, right? That you need to have a business plan, you need to have a financial plan, a marketing plan, but they don't tell you how to think about your business. They don't talk about the how. How do you put together a good business plan? How do you put together a good marketing and communications plan? And so I put together a learning lab on critical thinking skills. And so for today, I wanted to talk a little bit more about something that I talk about at just the very end of the other lab, which is how do you test your business idea, right? It's the how do I know? I've done all this work, but how do I know that this business has a chance to start and to grow? And so that is what we are going to talk about. At any time, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see the slides. But at any time, if you have any questions, by all means ask. Yep, and I can still see you all. So I'll leave it like this so that I can also, I won't go to full screen so that I can see you. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. So one of the reasons we need to learn how to think about our businesses is because the business landscape is always changing. And me as an advisor, so one of the businesses I started before I started working for the SBA and as a Main Street director was a business counselor. And I would help business owners write their business plans, or actually what I would do is I would write the business plan. So they were paying me to write a business plan. And I wrote great business plans, amazing business plans. But because I had all the background and all the information, the business owners didn't know how to execute. And while it's nice to continue getting more and more money by having people come back to you, what did you mean by this? What did type of thing? I know business owners don't, especially small business owners, don't have a whole lot of money to be spending on counselors, and so I stopped doing that. And so every time there's a change in your business, you can't necessarily go and hire somebody to help figure out what your business needs to do. And because it's just impractical. Change is constant. And especially over the last 2 years, we've seen that. I think we're all getting tired of the term pivot. I know my business owners are tired of hearing, well, how are you going to pivot this week to deal with the Delta variant type of thing? But it is, your customers change, the environment changes, the economy, technology, and just your business, moving from the startup phase to the growth phase to expansion and bringing on new products and services. And so what I want to do is a little bit of, sorry. I said that the books and the classes talk about the what, but we're going to talk about the how, and in particular, critical thinking, right? So broadly based, the idea of critical thinking, key points here. It is a disciplined process. There is this mythology that entrepreneurs are the shoot from the hip type of people. Good entrepreneurs are a little bit more disciplined than that, right? And it's all about collecting and evaluating information that you use as a guide for making decisions, right? So there is a method to the madness within a business. It is not just your, again, just shooting from the hip or your best, what your instinct tells you. Because so many times, if you're familiar with things like confirmation bias, and I see that a lot in businesses, you have an idea for a business, and of course it's your idea, so it is the best idea ever. And everything that you do and all the research that you do is all about confirming the idea instead of also trying to look at, well, what could possibly go wrong, right? And so there's a spectrum really of thinking about your businesses. I'm in the slides, and I sent Ashley the slides, so if anybody wants the PDF of the slides, you're welcome to have it. Today, I'm just going to focus on the pink area, the creative thinking aspect, because that's, I think, where most people that join the Fellows program are. They're in the process of thinking about starting their business or their nonprofit. And this is a lot of creative thinking, but everything is done on a spectrum. Some days you're going to have problem solving, which is much simpler than strategic planning. Uh, with my deli, every day we probably had a new vendor coming in saying you should carry this or that product, and the first test was, does this meet the mission of our business? In this case, we're an old world Italian deli. So someone who comes in with beef stew mixes, it's a very easy problem to solve. It doesn't fit with what we're doing, and so we're not going to move forward with this. We're not going to schedule a meeting. We're not going to. I don't want to say waste time, but having a conversation about something that just doesn't fit, it is not the best use of time. And then there's these in between things called decision making. Whether you open a second location, whether you franchise, sorts of things. They're not simple, but they're not as complex as coming up with the concept to begin with. And so it's different skills for different situations. To give you some examples of that, let's see here. Yeah. Compass Coffee, one of my examples. They started back in 2014, one location. This is two Marines that started it, and they were, basic premise of they roasted and served their own coffee, right? It was successful. They expanded from 2015 to 2020, opening a kiosk at the Washington Convention Center, several other brick and mortar locations. And then COVID hit, and businesses like coffee shops were closed. I mean, it was, you are closed. Does anybody know what Compass Coffee did when they had to close? Well, they had all of this equipment because they also did they did their own syrups for coffees. So they roasted their own coffees. They had their own syrups and everything. And the machinery for that could be converted into producing alcohol-based hand sanitizer. And so while they were still trying to figure out and get permission from the city to open walk-up windows and stuff like that, they started producing and had contracts with the city to produce and deliver hand sanitizer. So each of those milestones had a different thinking process, right? So prior to 2014, that was a lot of the strategic business planning. What's the concept going to look like? I'm sure day to day during operations, they had lots of problem solving. And then they had to do, again, this major pivot. And so as we talk about starting a business and putting together your business plan, and again, whether this is for a for-profit business, a nonprofit business, a government contracting company, even government agencies, when you are doing the strategic planning process, I found that this process applies across the board. Okay, so we're being creative here. To me, this is the most fun. You haven't started the business yet. You haven't, put in a whole lot of money or anything. So you can be as creative as you want. But you also have to have something to back it up at the end of the day. So the first step or the first recommendation I make is you have to do the work. And there's two aspects to this. First off, there's the you. Like I said, I started a business where I was writing business plans. And it was very successful for me and not very successful for the people who hired me because they weren't doing the work. They didn't understand all of the industry research, all of the market research, all the financial research that I did. And so I do not recommend that folks hire someone to write their business plan. I recommend that they write it themselves. And there is a lot of work to this, right? Um, there is the industry research or the market research or the financial research. What I typically do, there's like 9 or 10 parts to a business plan. I'm a binder kind of guy. And so I will get a binder with several tabs to it. And each one of those tabs, any information that I find on the subject. So let's say I have a tab on industry research for coffee shops. What's going on? What's going on with what's the future of coffee shops now that in the age of COVID? What's going on there? So any articles or anything that I read, I will throw in, and you can do this electronically, electronic binders. Anything on financial models for coffee shops, I will do the research. So lots and lots of research, lots of writing, lots of coming back and forth. Any of you who have done any sort of creative venture understand this process. I do storytelling, I do some comedy. I'm doing some more writing, memoir writing and whatnot. And pardon my language, but there's a term called the shitty first draft, right? And it is you just sit down and you write and you don't care about punctuation or anything like that. You just write to get the information down on paper. And then you go back and start editing. But the first step is you've got to get it down, and it's not going to be perfect. It's not even going to be close to perfect, and you have to accept that. It's my recommendation then, once you've been doing all this, you set it aside. Make sure that you have time to set it aside, because your subconscious brain is going to start working on stuff, right? So I know what Rodney does, and I can almost guarantee that while he is shooting video and has lots of B-roll and everything else, he'll wake up in the middle of the night because his subconscious has been working on a scene that he hadn't thought about or he was trying to figure out, right? So it's the same as, you get asked a question at trivia and you don't know the answer, and the next day while you're in the shower, you remember because you're not thinking about it. So make that part of your process. That isn't just an accident. There's a reason why that happens. And I won't get into all the neurobiology of it, but I say leverage the fact that it happens and set it aside. The other thing that I recommend is, sorry, I lost sorry about that. There we go. Share. So many business owners don't want to talk about their business idea because they're afraid it will get stolen. And I do understand that, but that happens so rarely, because it is not so easy just to take somebody's idea and create a successful business out of it, right? And so I recommend sharing. That's why I love a program like the Dog Tag Fellows. You are in a group of other people who are trying to do the same things. You understand what you're trying to do, and you get to share. You get to talk about your ideas. You get to get other feedback from other people. You get another perspective. The first time you go through this, you may not have the right business idea, or you may not have the right product or service. So don't be afraid to start over. This is the rinse and repeat, right? There have been several times that I had an idea for a business and I started doing research on it, and determined that after the research that this just wasn't I just didn't have the right idea, right? For some reason or another, I didn't think it was going to work. I set it aside, and a lot of times I come back to it and there are bits and pieces of it that I have cannibalized for other business ideas, right? So that you may have to go through this process a couple of times. And then the bottom line, and again, I don't want to chalk this up to its magic, but when you hit on the right business idea, when you have it right, you will know it, right? Again, those of us that work creatively understand this. We may go through several iterations of a song or a poem or a story. But when you hit the right note, right, you know it. And a lot of it comes from the fact of all the things that you learn while you were doing this, right? And so that's kind of the process that I recommend for anyone who's starting a new venture. Any questions at this point?
Charles, I wrote one in the chat.
Okay,
About, and it's really about, I guess if you know it when you see it, right? And I imagine, your foundation or your business on why you're in business. Once you have that set, is it okay to change that part? Because I imagine like all the things, like if those vendors are coming in with beef stew or whatever, I would imagine you're testing that up to your foundation or why you're in business.
Yeah, I would say yes, you have to be flexible with any of this, but I would also caution one of another big issue, and it may not seem like an issue when you start, but it is too much success too early. I have run into businesses that got started and started getting so many business owner or customers that they would open a second, a third location. And what they didn't take into account was folks were interested in them as a new business. But after the newness wore off 6 months to 9 months later, it went back to the levels that they had originally projected. And now they had more expenses than they needed, and that was detrimental. So yes, there's the you know it when you see it, but it is okay to pivot from that. I just caution, again, do that smartly, and so that's kind of the next piece. My experience has been the typical business model is you have an idea, you do your planning, you execute, and then you just pray that you're right. Well, we don't want you praying, right? You're going to do that anyway as a business owner, but we don't want your business model to be about hopes and prayers. And so, and this is a very linear progression. While I joke at the end, folks tend to develop businesses in a very linear way. They have an idea, they put the plan, and then they execute. What I would recommend, and this is how you test, this is how you know while you're going along, and this is based off of the lean methodology, or in software development, it's known as develop a little, test a little. So you start with the idea up top and you build a little bit. I use restaurant examples all the time. So let's say you want to be the next gourmet sandwich place. So what you would build is your list or inventory of maybe your 5 best sandwiches. And those are going to be your products. Now, you may end up with more. You may end up with sides and sodas and chips and all this kind of stuff. But what's your core product? So you come up with 5 sandwich ideas. Instead of negotiating a 5-year lease on a brick and mortar space and doing a build out and everything, and saying, here are my sandwiches after you have committed to all of this funding, find another way to test your product or your service that's cheaper, much smaller scale. One of the things that I used to love doing when I did my Veteran Business Outreach Center work, we would host um, focus groups, right? So somebody had a business idea, and we would set up and say, yeah, so we're going to get 24 people who you don't know to come in and sample your product and to give you feedback. And they didn't have to pay rent. They didn't. The only thing they had to do was really listen. And sometimes that's the hardest part, but that was where the best advice comes from. And so that's the measure and the data part, and you learn from that. One of the again, so back to the restaurant example, I had a business owner who had a catering business. He wanted to open a fast casual sandwich shop. So we said, yeah, so let's recreate that in our space. And so I invited about 20 people that did not know the business, did not know the owner. And I said, I want you to serve them as you would serve them if you had your restaurant, your fast casual. And the food was amazing. The problem was the concept. He had, micro arugula, and he had little, beet and basil sauces that he would put on the plate as people were sitting down to eat. And the folks were like, hey, the food is really great, but I thought the concept was fast casual. And this is, really high end. And, as a chef, that was a little insulting for him. But, I had to say, let's take a couple days and then come back and let's talk about this. And I said, they didn't complain about your food. They loved the food. It just doesn't match the concept. And you're going to have a lot of waste and everything with all these little, sauces and things like that. Is there a more economic way of doing this? And so it's kind of back to the drawing board and through this cycle again. Right? So instead of this very linear progression, it is cyclical. And so it is the build a little, test a little, learn, and try again. Some of the ways you can do this, or some advice that I have on doing this. So it's fine to think big. But as you're getting started, start small, right? You do not have to have a menu that is 3 pages long. In fact, if I walk into a restaurant and it's one of these types of menus, I probably will not eat there, because you can't do all of those things fresh and good. The same with, say, software app development. It does not have to have all the bells and whistles right out the door. What is the fundamental thing that you want your application to do? And provide it. And if you read the book, The Lean Startup, that's how that author, Eric Ries, got started, or actually didn't. They spent so much time and so much money trying to develop this app. And when they put it out there for people to try, they said, it's interesting, but it doesn't do the one thing I need it to do. And they spent, millions of dollars on a prototype. Certainly use prototypes or test services. The guys who started Warby Parker, the eyeglass company, before they launched their website, they basically storyboarded what the process through their website would look like. Right? So it was all drawings. They hadn't even coded anything yet. And they would go to their friends and say, hey, if you were looking to buy eyeglasses, and this was the homepage, where would you press, or where would you look to search through our frame category? Or where would you search for pricing? Where would you, and people would be like, well, I don't see the button for pricing. They'd be like, oh, okay, so where should we put that button for pricing? But they were just using pen and paper. That was their prototype. Nowadays, creating a test website is very easy to do. And again, it doesn't have to have the bells and whistles. Even for a full-blown website, for a fully operating business, it does not have to be complicated. The simpler, the easier to navigate, the better. One of the wonderful things that we have that's come about in like the last 10 years, there are so many places to test. There are incubators, there are pop-ups, there are market spaces. You know, I have Eastern Market here in my corridor, and on the weekends, you know, there's probably 150 businesses, vendors that come out, and you know, they pay a small fee for a space. They've got their tent, they've got their table, and then they have their product. So, you know, before any of them go into a brick and mortar space, they can, you know, they can join a market and test whether somebody wants to buy their product. Again, you can do tests on websites. There are commercial spaces. You know, I don't need a whole lot of office space, so I'm in a co-working space right now. It saves my organization money to do that. If you're going to start a restaurant, there are commercial kitchens that you can go use and basically rent, as opposed to having to put it all together yourself. There are maker spaces, you name it. Utilize those before you launch your business. Take advantage of collaboration. I have a number of retail establishments in my corridor, and somebody who is new. Seems like everybody wants to create candles. You know, if you have a new line of candles that you want to test, go to a small business retailer. You know, I've got a gift and card shop across the street here, and he is more than happy to stock your new cards or line of cards or your new candles, you know, for maybe like 3 or 6 months to see how they're going to sell. Lots of collaborations like that. The last one there is a little, I don't want to say controversial, but there are some folks who agree, some folks who don't agree. There is this whole world of crowdfunding, and it is, let's say you need $10,000 to start your business for whatever it is. So let's say you've got a film project and you need $10,000 to cover the cost of the film project. You can go online and you can say, hey, you know, I'm a up and coming film director, producer. I have this idea. I need $10,000 to make this film. Would you donate? And these are just people off the street, right? Well, they're not on the street. They're on these websites. So, you know, things like Indiegogo, Kickstarter. These are all crowdfunding platforms. And if you put together a good presentation, if you put together a good, here's why you would want to give this, you can raise money. You know, we did that when COVID first hit. We only had so much money that we could give out in small business grants, but we reached out, we put together a crowdfunding campaign, and we said, if we can raise $10,000, every dime of that minus whatever fees the crowdfunding site charges, we will write checks to small business owners. And they don't have to pay it back, nothing. We ended up with donations for close to $30,000. And all that money, we wrote checks to small businesses to help them cover their rent or to pay their employees or whatever. And so you can use crowdfunding. In many of the crowdfunding sites, it is philanthropic. So people give because they like the idea. There is no expectation of ownership in the company. There's no expectations of a product or anything. You can certainly include that if you want to, but for the most part, it's philanthropic. So to me, a good way to test your idea is if people are willing to give you money for it. people kind of forget when they open businesses. That's the whole point, is it's an exchange. I will give you a product for money. And, if you do a crowdfunding campaign and folks don't fund it, it's probably because, they don't see the value of your product. And so, that's a good opportunity to go back and say, hey, so I want to do a little research. Why did you not give to this? What was it about the product? What was it about the service? And so not only is it good feedback, but you can earn some startup capital. And there's nothing better than that. So that's it. That's my mini learning lab. Hope to walk you through the creative thinking process, and to give you some ideas on how to test your product without going too deeply into debt. Let me look here. Sorry, let me look in chat.
Thanks, Charles. Yeah, and there were a couple of questions that came through in the chat. So John was asking, and you touched on this a little bit, but someone who doesn't feel comfortable creating a business plan, would you recommend hiring a business consultant?
What I would recommend actually is reaching out to an SBA resource partner, a Main Street program. There are plenty of resources that are out there that you do not have to pay to do this. They will be advisors. They won't write it for you, but they will certainly advise you on how to do it. So especially for this group, the first place I would look is the Veteran Business Outreach Centers. There's 15, 16, I forget now how many across the country. But that is all that is a big part of what they do, is help advise you on how to write your business plan. So if you're uncomfortable, absolutely seek an advisor, but I would not hire a consultant to do it.
And I would just add, as part of the dog tag program, our fellows all work on their capstone project throughout the program. And we walk you through the steps of writing that business plan. So thinking through who's your target customer, what is the market look like, and how can you do a market analysis? And really thinking through, like, what is your product and what sets you apart as a business owner? What's your special sauce? And so that's, to Charles's point, like, it's so helpful to understand your business and be able to put that into words as you are working on your business plan. But there are lots of supports and resources out there so that you don't feel like you have to do it by yourself.
So Rodney, I'm seeing the question you typed in, and I apologize. I don't think I really answered your question, the question that you asked. The why. I don't think that the why should change. The why is the value proposition. The how you do it may change and probably will change, but I don't think the why should change once you've settled on it. Now, the why may change from when you first had the business idea to while you're doing the research and you've developed your final business plan. But by the end of the day, the why should stay, right? So my organization, the how we do what we do has certainly changed over the last 2 years because of COVID. But the bottom line has been about supporting our small business community and being an economically vibrant neighborhood. So the why has not changed, the how has. Someone put in brainstorming process. Yeah, the term brainstorming it is a little controversial. Typically in like corporate brainstorming, it's who's ever the loudest wins. That's not what a good brainstorming process is. But certainly as you and your team are starting the creative process, the business planning process, brainstorming can certainly be a very valuable tool.
I correct me if I'm wrong, Renee, but I think she wrote that while you was mentioning the shitty draft, right?
Ah.
Which I call it the vomit draft when I'm doing my stories. Yep.
Yep. Let's see, would these guidelines be applied to those buying into a franchise? It depends on the franchise. So the nice thing about a franchise is that they will hand you an operator's manual, right? And a good franchise will have classes that you attend on how to do all of this. And so a lot of that is already done for you, right? What the big piece that you're going to have to figure out as a franchise owner is the financials. Where is my startup capital coming from? You know, a lot of times with with a franchise, you pay a significant fee back. You don't just buy the license and then run the franchise independently. You know, that is why like all the Jimmy Johns look the same and they all have the same promotions and everything. So off the top, before your profit, you have to pay your franchise a fee for that. And so part of the creative process for franchise owners is, can I afford this? How am I going to fund this as I'm getting started?
John, have you been connected in with 100 Entrepreneurs Project at all?
No, I never heard of it, to be honest with you.
Okay, I have your email address, so I'll send you some information about them, but they're located here in the DC area. And I know one of their partners talks a lot about franchises. And so I think she might be a good resource if that's something you're interested in,
Yes.
just in terms of what that process looks like.
Yes, that would be awesome. Because I have been looking at that. The franchise I'm looking to buy into is called In-Home Services. Pretty much takes care of anyone from elderly folks, anyone who's handicapped, just anybody with disabilities and things of that nature, which is very similar to what I enjoy doing, which is taking care of people. But just like Charles said, the finance portion, that's the scary part, and that's the part that tends to discourage me, if you will, because I haven't really gotten a good grasp on how to do the finance. I'm really trying to not have to tap into my IRA or my 401k plan. I know that keeps coming up, but I'm really trying not to do that if need be. If I'll sell one of my properties and maybe use the profit from that, but I'm really trying to avoid touching my retirement. So I want to kind of get Charles's opinion on that. As far as the financing portion, would you try to hold off on touching your retirement accounts, or is that a good way to go? Because I know you don't have to pay money on that. You don't have to pay it back.
So my recommendation when I teach my finance classes is do not touch your retirement. At some point, you want to retire. I have been in classes where, and I forget what this thing is called, but especially with franchises, and you'll hear this with franchises, is within the franchise, you create your retirement program for the franchise, and then you transfer your personal retirement into the business retirement plan and use that to start and operate your business and then pay back into it. My kind of the bottom line is that there's lots of things like that you could do, but my recommendation is you plan to retire at some point, so do not touch it. There are certainly other ways. So, and again, this is where most franchises have relationships with banks. So, if a franchise is a successful franchise and their business owners are successful business owners. A recommendation to a bank that has helped those franchise owners get started can be very useful. And there are some banks that won't touch franchises. There are some banks specifically, even the SBA has franchise lending, right? So this is where I would work with a small business advisor, work with an SBA person, and to look at the options for funding. But I would not touch my retirement or your retirement.
Charles, I want to ask you kind of in respect to me opening this business. My first business that I'm looking to open up, hopefully I would like to be able to operate it from the house. So this way I can avoid having to, the first business I own, going to a brick and mortar, because it just comes with so many expenses. What is your theory on that? As far as guidelines, and how does that work as far as operating a business from the house? And can this be done while you still have a job working for another company until eventually the company gets to a certain magnitude? Then you can just use that as your primary vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, all of that is possible. So I ran my consulting company out of my house because there was no need for me to have an office, a brick and mortar space, right? And I would just meet with people at coffee shops. The thing to keep in mind is if you decide to expand, you have to make sure you allocate for those costs. But that's certainly doable. Can I do this while I'm working for another company? It's kind of it depends. I was doing government contracting, and so I would work from like 7 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon at my government contracting job. And then I let my employer know this, that I would then go to the restaurant. And so, I had my medical, I had my retirement, I had an income coming from the government contracting job, so I didn't have to take anything out of the business. But my business partner was spending more hours there. That was where his income and everything was coming from. So, that was fine for a while through the startup stage, but at some point, yeah, you're going to have to, you're going to want to make some profit from the business to pay for you instead of you paying for the business. So yes, it is. In government contracting, I would caution, be very careful about that. If you are a government contractor or you want to start a government contracting business and you're still doing something else, there can be conflicts of interest there. But yeah, certainly all of those are doable.
It's funny you say that, Charles. I feel, I apologize that I'm kind of chewing the fat here. It's funny because consulting is another thing that strikes my interest. I retired from the Army as an intel analyst, and I'm currently studying cybersecurity. So I have thought about being like a security consultant because it's something that I'm very passionate about and very knowledgeable on, which is what I did in the military. But I've always wondered about that. If I was to do security consulting with the government, how would that work? How do you go about getting those contracts? I'm going to be relocating to the Tampa area, which is near MacDill Air Force Base. So of course, I'm going to reach out to those guys and see if they want to hire me for that case. But how would that work? Who do I reach out to? How does that ball even work?
Yep.
Sorry, John, I think that's a little bit outside the scope of this session. And I do see a couple of other questions in the chat. So let's get to those questions. And then at the end, we might have time to come back to that. So I saw that Earl had a question about projecting the cost of a business. Charles, would you like to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, good question. The thing to remember is that most businesses have already been started by someone else, right? And so most businesses have kind of what the business finances should look like. And again, I'll go back to the restaurant business. So in the restaurant business, the business model is typically 30, 30, 30, and 10. So 30% of your costs are going to be food costs, 30% are labor, 30% are overhead. So that's rent, utilities, with a 10% profit margin. The reality with restaurants is because of waste, spoilage, returns, theft, the average profit margin for a brick and mortar restaurant is 3 to 5%. And that is the business model that most restaurant owners use and live by. So depending on the type of business you want to start, there's a different business model, and you can do some research online about business models for that particular industry, or reach out to somebody who is doing something similar, right? If you're thinking about opening a retail gift store, reach out to a small business owner who owns a retail gift store. And, they're not going to give you their financials, but they certainly would be able to sit down and say, here is what my business costs typically look like. So that's reaching out to business owners can help with that.
Awesome. Thanks, Charles. And then Stephanie also put a question in the chat. What unique guidance would you offer for more abstract product business ideas, such as creating an environment where people can connect and grow relationships rather than a tangible physical product?
Yeah, so even that has to have something tangible to it. So say a website where everybody meets up, or chat rooms where people meet up. I would develop just very inexpensive prototypes and see if anybody shows up, right? If this is where they want a creative environment where people can do this, just a simple website will give you an idea of whether that happened, whether that's of interest to them or not. I did put the PDF of the slides in the chat, so feel free to download. And John, just coming back real quick on government contracting, there's an organization called PTAC, Procurement and Technical Assistance Centers. All they do is provide advice and guidance on government contracting. And they are nationwide.
What was it called? PTAC?
Yep, PTAC, or you may see it, I'm trying to think of what else. Typically it's PTAC, Procurement and Technical Assistance Centers.
Thanks, I'll Google it and research it.
Okay, well, we're coming up right at noon. And want to thank Charles for joining us today, for sharing our mini learning lab. So excited that everybody could join. Definitely some great questions and some conversation at the end. Any last questions before we conclude for the day? All right. Well,
I would just say if they do have questions, they should join the Dog Tag Fellows program.
Yes, thank you for that plug, Charles.
Yes, I'm waiting to get enrolled in myself.
Great. Sarah, could you put the link to subscribe to our emails in the chat? Definitely feel free to sign up. We are accepting applications for the DC program through September 15th. So you have one more week to apply. I encourage you to get that information in quickly so that we can, have time to review your application. And then also for the Chicago program, and this is specifically if you are based in the greater Chicagoland area, we are accepting applications through October 15th. And so encourage you, again, if you're located in Chicago, to look into that as well. So thank you all for joining us, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.